thank you for being here. I appreciate your presence this evening. Could we have roll call, please?
Yes. Mrs. Lohr?
Here.
Miss Lauer?
Present.
Dr. Powers?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Wise?
Here.
Mr. Irwin?
Here.
Mrs. Killian?
Here.
Thank you, Dr. Doler. And will you please rise and join me in our pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. Reviewing our vision and mission statement, working together with our community, we inspire our students to discover their talents and rise to their greatest potential. Our mission is building on the strengths of our diverse community. We create an engaging, comprehensive educational environment that supports the growth of lifelong learners. We are going to change we would like to change the agenda this evening, and so it would be in this order. We will postpone dealing with the strategic plan since we have other issues we want to spend more time with. We would like to postpone that till another meeting. We would have an HR report, and then deal with the playground equipment transfer, and then have reports from Dr. Hayworth and Dr. Brucken, and so if I could have a motion to change the agenda.
And public comment will come after Dr. Brucken talks, correct?
Yes, and Dr. Holler would come after those reports from our medical experts. There would be public comments following that. So could I have a motion to change the agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Mrs. Scott made the motion, and a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Lohr?
Aye.
Miss Lauer?
Aye.
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mrs. Killian?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate that. So we can go ahead with our HR.
President Lauer, Superintendent Hayworth, members of the Board of Trustees, administration seeks approval of the personnel report as presented tonight.
I move approval of the personnel report.
I second that.
Thank you, we have a motion and a second to approve the personnel report. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lohr?
Aye.
Miss Lauer?
Aye.
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mrs. Killian?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The motion passes. Dr. Hayworth, the resolution regarding the playground equipment.
Yes, administration seeks approval for the passage of a resolution that would transfer the playground equipment located on this campus to West Vigo Little League.
I'll make a motion to transfer the playground equipment to the West Vigo Little League.
I second.
Thank you. Motion by Mrs. Wise, a second by Mrs. Scott to transfer the playground equipment to the West Vigo Little League.
Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Sorry.
Mrs. Lohr?
Aye.
Miss Lauer?
Aye.
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mrs. Killian?
Aye.
you. Dr. Hayward?
Madam President, members of the board, I stand in front of you today to speak to COVID-19. We'll take my mask off. Really, in my lifetime, 30 years in education, I've never seen anything quite like this. COVID-19 has destroyed families, not just from the illness standpoint, but just what they believe about COVID-19, philosophy of how they're going to run their households. You know, it's done the same thing to churches in our own community. The effects of COVID-19 are devastating, not just from a healthcare position, but when you're thinking about culture and community. So when I speak to these things tonight, I speak to them and don't speak to them lightly. If you were to ask me my goals in standing up in front of you tonight to speak to COVID-19 and a plan to move the district forward, I would say, how do we reduce the number of quarantines? And how do we keep school open and maintain 5-day instruction? What is true, I think, it's what the experts tell me here locally, is that fewer than 50% of all vaccine-capable people, 12 and older, have received the vaccine. Adults in our community have over 5 months to receive the vaccine. Students in the middle schools and high schools have had over 3 months to receive the vaccine. Vaccine is free. With few exceptions, there are no barriers to receiving the vaccine. Students, however, 11 and under cannot be vaccinated. The VCSC serves approximately 6,000 students that do not have the opportunity to be vaccinated. When I look at our data across last year, today's COVID positivity rate mirrors that from January. I believe currently we have one 16-year-old student that is in the hospital because of COVID. There were 50 cases yesterday, and 11 of those were students. You know, I'm like many of you in terms of how you find your knowledge in regards to masks and vaccines. So if mine differs from you, maybe I'm looking at a different source than you. But I believe masks slows the spread of the virus. That the vaccine either prevents you from getting sick or really sick. I'm sure there's a medical term that Dr. Brecken will help us with there. You can be vaccinated and still transmit the virus. You will not be quarantined if you have been vaccinated. If you're wearing a mask, and those in your party are wearing a mask, you will not be quarantined. One thing is true, last November was maybe the toughest in my 30-year career, where we shut down 1 elementary school, 2 elementary schools, 3 elementary schools, and then finally the entire district. Not because of the number of students that were in quarantine, but because of the number of staff members that had been in quarantine. For our staff, and probably for many of you at work, there are no COVID sick days this year. We've been working with Dr. Brecken, Dr. Holder, and in the health team on this particular rise in COVID for the last 2 weeks. So I would suggest these components to our plan. Maybe if you would Outside components, no masks. Elementary components, all elementary school students and staff will be masked. All elementary school students and staff will receive mask breaks. Possible recommendations. The VCSC will continue to evaluate our local data and look to modify our plan on September the 9th. Middle school components. All 6th grade students and staff will be masked. No. Over 70% of our 6th graders are 11 years of age. All 6th grade students and staff will receive mask breaks. All 7th and 8th grade students will be required to carry masks and wear them in large group settings, always. Although it is recommended that all 7th and 8th grade students and teachers keep masks on, they have the option of taking their masks off during forward-facing instruction, band, orchestra, PE, CTE, lab work, etc. VCSC will continue to evaluate our local data and respond accordingly on September 9th as needed. High school components. All high school students will be required to carry masks and wear them in large group settings, included but not limited to hallways before and after school. Although it is recommended that all high school students and teachers keep masks on, they have the option of taking their masks off during forward-facing instruction, band, orchestra, PE, CTE, lab work, etc. Again, the VCSC will continue to evaluate our local data and respond accordingly on September 9th at a regularly scheduled board meeting. Athletic, band events, those things that we have in the fall, no masks are required at outdoor events. Masks required for fans at indoor events when social distancing is not achievable. Athletes are masked only on the bench. We will turn over to Dr. Brecken at this point.
I'd like to interject here that we have always had a tremendous amount of respect, I think, for each other in this community. And I do expect that to be the foundation of our school board meetings always. This is it's an emotional topic. We each have strong opinions or confusion, but I think we have a lot of speakers, and we need to listen to each one with respect.
Thank you. Many people came here tonight, this evening, with preconceived notions about what they were going to hear and how they would react and what exactly they plan to say, either in support or rebuttal of whatever program was put forth. And the topic of masking in school policies, we start back to school, is obviously a hot button issue. My hope is that as we start out the meeting and start to evaluate this plan, that open-mindedness and abandonment of those plans to be heard can be carefully considered after hearing the plan and all of the nuances and the rationale behind its features. First of all, from a public health standpoint, July 27th, the CDC came out, the Centers for Disease Control, with their plan that recommends masking in all schools K through 12 at all times. It's obviously based on the staggering numbers stemming from the highly infectious Delta variant. Schools have been forced then to either choose masks or no masks. And this choice immediately refueled the divisiveness of the situation in general. But what we all know, because we're realists, is that one size does not fit all. For those of you guys charged with picking a program, I don't think it's choice A versus choice B. We need to make our own choice C. That was the rationale behind the development of this plan. It's essentially a customized approach specific to our kids, our schools, and our community. All of us share with a social responsibility to make sure our kids get an education, and for most, it's through public schools. And for those of you, people who create the opportunity for the education, they're also charged with creating a safe environment for the participants, which are the kids. It's really no different than us in the hospitals being charged to create a safe environment for the patients, because they are not there by their choice. We have to do everything that we can to protect them. So what does everybody in this room want, collectively, without exception, is 5 days a week of face-to-face school for all kids of all ages. That's the common goal. We want football on Friday nights, we want homecoming events, we want traditional proms not held in parking lots or tennis courts in the spring. We want our children to receive a quality education while keeping them and all of us as safe along the way as possible. That's the goal. What's the way to get there? What we're looking at in the community, it's been well publicized. The Delta variant is 90% of the infections that we're seeing in the state of Indiana. Highly infectious. Our hospitalization rates are going up. We're up 400% this month versus last month. We're seeing about 96% of all COVID deaths are unvaccinated people. 95% of hospitalizations are unvaccinated individuals. We know that kids under the age of 12 do not have the ability to vaccinate. It's not an option at this time. It might be at some point. Right now it is not. There's a special charge collected to those. We have had many high school students get vaccinated. I look at this topic from a variety of different facets, clearly. From a hospitalist standpoint, from a doctor's standpoint, I take care of these patients. I understand the havoc that the disease wreaks. As a parent, I want my kid in school. From your guys' standpoint, we all want our kids in school. The teachers want their kids in school. I think if we can consider this plan, we're going to find out that it is amenable to kids because they want to be in school and this is the way to get there. It's amenable to the teachers, to the administration, and to the public health leaders. There are no perfect plans out there for everybody. But when we design this plan, the thought process from day one is it doesn't have to be A or B. Let's make a C. And that's to take into account everyone else's opinions too, which we're going to be hearing a lot tonight. Vaccination and masking are the ways to avoid quarantines. As schools come back in session, we're reminded of last year, all the quarantines, all of the AB, all the virtual, all the emergency meetings about shutting down schools. We have to avoid quarantines. If we look at masking in general, people that are masked are not subject to quarantine if they're asymptomatic following an exposure. And that is not rules set forth by us in the local level. That is a state, Indiana State Department of Health rule. If you are vaccinated and exposed to a positive person, you do not quarantine if you're asymptomatic. So high school students have the ability to be vaccinated, which means if they are unmasked and exposed, they will not be subject to quarantine as long as they remain asymptomatic. If you are unvaccinated as a high school student and wearing a mask, you are not subject to quarantine if you remain asymptomatic. Quarantines is what led us to last year's debacle of public institutions across this country. That is the ABs, the virtuals, the missed school. Not to mention the ramifications outside of that with parents needing to take off of work to care for their kids. So this is a way for the Vigo County school system to get through an entire calendar year, hopefully, to keep people in class 5 days a week. Are there some sacrifices? Sure. But that's how things get done. There's common ground in this plan. So please don't look at this as mask versus no mask. Look at this as my friend Tom developed, situational masking. There's a meaning to all of it. And it's a way through. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Holder. Would you like to say anything? Put her on the spot.
Thank you, Dr. Bruckman.
Hello, everybody, and I want to say hi. I'm Dr. Jackie Holder. I have been a pediatrician in this community for 20 years. I've probably taken care of a lot of people in this room, their children and some of their grandchildren. So when the school corp asked me to come and lend my opinion about this, they asked me to lend my medical opinion. So I'm just going to tell you what from my perspective, taking care of children, because I've answered questions about vaccines probably more than anybody in this room. Answered questions about diseases and what's the safest thing. I mean, that's what I do every day. So when I look at it, I think of, on the one hand, wearing a mask and what the negative is from that. I mean, there's definitely a lot of opinions about that. I'm not going to disagree with it. But when it comes down to the medical facts, the facts are it doesn't hurt children, and it actually helps prevent them from getting some of your relatives ill. Now, everybody can have opinion about it. This is my medical opinion. When I think of what happened last year with the pandemic and how the kids suffered, and you all know them because they were in your homes. You were their grandparents and parents, but when it came down to it, they didn't get the right amount of education all last year. They were home. I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to and how much they have achieved or not achieved over the last year, and how much that had to do with being in school or not. There was a lot of angst from parents about potentially losing their job from their child being home yet another time, or being exposed or sick themselves. These are like social issues that affect all of us. So I guess what I would really like to emphasize is, from my medical opinion, those that can't get vaccinated in order to stay in school, the rules are for quarantine. If you're exposed, you have to stay home, and that's just what we have to deal with. If that changes, then the rules would change for it. I don't want any child to be sent home unnecessarily from elementary school if they can help it. I'd like them to stay in school and do the best that they can, to get the best education that they can possibly do. I don't want them to bring virus home to your homes and infect some of your relatives. Because every person in the hospital today at Union that we're caring for was exposed by someone. And that someone could be, their family member. It can be their coworker. So I think that this is a bigger issue than just masks. Obviously, there's a lot of passion, and I appreciate it. But from my perspective, I think that this is a right plan to keep our kids in school. So, anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Holder. Dr. Valentivich?
There's a lot of people here tonight.
Good.
I appreciate everybody being here this evening. I'm Tom Valentivich. I'm Director of Student Services. And I want to talk a little bit about quarantine. I know, and so I'm going to go a little bit off my script, which I don't have a script here, but I know this is a passionate topic for everybody. I've lived in this community for over 30 years, and this is about as passionate as I've seen it. We can do it with respect. We could do it with being humble and having a sense of community behind us too. That's important, to have that respect. So last year, as Dr. Bruckman and Dr. Holder said, I know there were a tremendous amount of challenges. And there were two really awful things about last year outside of the tragedies that the virus caused. The second worst thing, in my mind, were all the quarantines. I have to work with my team with quarantines. That's my job. We quarantined a lot of people last year. It's not an easy job. We quarantine students at times 2, 3, 4 times. Each time was difficult. We have to follow the quarantine rules though. That's not a choice. It's embedded in the state law through the Indiana Department of Health. It's not a job that I revere, but it's a job that my team and I have done for the last 19 months. But that was the second worst thing. Not for me, but for everybody, to have your child quarantined. I'll break my own HIPAA law. I was quarantined at home for 14 days. I can't avoid that though. That's the rule. We follow rules. The worst thing though, the worst thing in my opinion, was that we didn't have school every day. I have a child, I have 3. But I have a child in school. I wanted that child in school every day. 5 days a week. That was important to me, and it's important to everybody behind me. It's important to everybody in front of me. Whether you want to mask or not mask, and I hope everybody's respectful when they talk about that. We can't avoid the quarantines. Masking avoids more quarantines than not masking. I don't want to have to do more quarantines than I have to. We're working with the health department to be sure we're looking at those rules so we can cut down on the quarantines. Mask to mask contact, when there's 2 people wearing masks, we're not going to have to quarantine for that at this point. That's a good thing. That's going to cut down on a lot of quarantines. The more we quarantine, the more people are at home, the more students are at home, the more parents have to miss work. I hope everybody internalizes that a little bit, that this is to avoid those quarantines. At this point, I think that's all I have to say.
I have a question real fast.
Yes, sir.
So, you're the quarantine czar is what I'm gonna call you right now.
Well, let's not put that in the paper, but
Can you explain the differences in quarantine from last year to this year? Because you just said that 2 masked people would not need to be quarantined, whereas last year, obviously, masks were mandated by the state, and we still had quarantines.
yeah, they changed the rule. Thank you, Mr. Irwin. They changed the rule, and if you are in a classroom or in a school setting, and there's an individual that is a positive case, and both individuals are masked, or the individuals around that person are masked, and that person was masked, then we will not have to quarantine, except the person that's positive. So that's a big difference than last year.
Is that a July 19th change? Was that when that happened? July 19th?
I believe so.
Just very recently.
Very recently. Yep.
And how does the vaccination factor into that quarantine as well?
Right. If you are vaccinated and you're a close contact, named a close contact, you do not need to quarantine.
No symptoms.
If you have no symptoms, thank you.
And quarantine is out of our hands, it's out of the board's hands, it's out of the school corporation's hands. Quarantining comes from the state, correct?
That is my understanding. I'm not an attorney, but that is my understanding.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we have an attorney.
Yeah, John, would you care to speak, follow up to what's behind that?
Sure, yeah. John Mays, Bozeman, McKinney, and Evans, and counsel to the school corporation. Yeah, to follow up, it was...
Wait a minute, John. Could you hear him in the back.
Sorry. I started getting some feedback there. John Mays, Bose McKinney and Evans, counsel to the school corporation. And to follow up on Ms. Lauer's comment, it was July 19th that the State Department of Health put out its control measures related to communicable diseases here, COVID-19, pursuant to its powers under state law. And the State Department of Health has the ability to regulate how communicable diseases are reported, how people are isolated and quarantined, and that is above and beyond what our county health department can do, and above and beyond what we as a school board can do. And it extends to all sorts of diseases and conditions. So, you know, we had measles outbreaks in the past. State Department of Health would step in, county health departments as well. And so July 19th, they put out control measures. And we've all been familiar with terms like close contact and contact tracing, terms, you know, 2 years ago we never would have known. And as Tom, Dr. Balatevich mentioned, they've modified the understanding of what it means to be a close contact in the school setting when both the infected and the exposed individuals are wearing masks. And so for purposes of, and this doesn't get into, they don't speak to, and the State Department of Health is not saying that schools must or must not wear a mask or mandate mask or must not mandate vaccines. That's not what the State Department of Health is saying. What they're saying is, if you have a positive case and that student who has a positive case is wearing a mask, around them is, each of them, the exposed individuals are wearing a mask, you can take that into consideration and not have to quarantine everyone. And so then quarantine and isolation applies to those that have a positive test. It would not have that added impact. For example, one situation that I heard recently was that for every one student that was infected, there were 40 students that were being quarantined just because of those State Department of Health protocol measures. And that's in a situation where there are not masks. And so here in a mask setting that's being discussed by Dr. Balatevich, we would have that flexibility to not have to quarantine as many.
So question for you then, so that falls under what state law, that authority for the health department?
It's under Title 16 Communicable Diseases.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so in that state law, I'm just, for purposes of discussion here, what happens if a school corporation is found to be in violation of that?
And that expands to with any communicable disease, you know, measles, anything. The State Department of Health always has the power to step in and order quarantines, order isolations in extreme circumstances through court powers and the like. But ultimately, they retain that power as a State Department of Health.
So, and I mean, through reporting, obviously, maybe if someone else could speak to this as far as what the school corporation is doing, how that's reported, how the State Department of Health is monitoring that. Maybe Joni, you could chime in on that to help us
When you say
understand.
monitoring that, what are you referring to?
How we're doing the quarantine and whether we're not, we are in compliance with that. Like how they know we're doing it, basically.
The Vigo County Health Department works closely every day with the school corporation on making sure people are properly quarantined. Over the last 18 months, there have been situations where people are non-compliant, and we've had to ask the prosecutor's office to step in. So it's looking at those type of situations, because I don't remember what level felony it is, but it is when you, and you can get a court order to force someone. I've only seen that once in my career. It was somebody with tuberculosis. But, Title 16, Article 41, Chapter 9, it's very specific to it. And again, public health is looking at population-based health and safety, and I don't think that it would be in our best interest as a school corporation to go against state code, which are the wishes of our state legislature based on facts and science.
Thank you for explaining that.
Any other-
I do have another question for our physicians. If you could just speak to, in previous meetings, I have personally asked questions about how COVID affects young children, the infection rate, the severity, what that looks like. In the recommendations that we've seen tonight, there's more masking for younger children. And so I would just like for you to explain the reasoning behind that recommendation and the numbers that we're seeing for our kids here locally in our region.
It's an excellent question. We are seeing an increased numbers. The positivity rate right now is over 6%, which is the highest we've been for quite some time. The upward trajectory, that's for all people. We are seeing in our contact tracing day to day a lot of kids, and we're seeing that from household contacts. We've been talking since day one that thankfully this disease severity typically picks out the older people and the most vulnerable people. The kids have been quote unquote spared from severe disease. We're seeing the Delta variant affecting, and as they're infecting younger people, we're seeing a higher level of severity in some people. Our hospitalization, those numbers are coming down as far as our ages. We are still not seeing, thankfully, a lot of severe illness in school-age kids, meaning elementary and certainly pre-K. Remember, older kids, though, are basically like adults. So we are seeing more severe illness in the adult age, 16, 17-year-old type of population. We have, I think Dr. Hayward spoke, we have one student right now hospitalized. From the younger standpoint, it's still holding that the severity of illness is actually pretty minimal. That said, the bigger reason that we're looking at masking these K through 6 kids is to prevent the quarantine. If all the kids are masked in a classroom and if there's a classroom positive, and there will be a classroom positive, the contact tracing is going to mandate widespread quarantining. And if we wipe out classroom by classroom by classroom, we are back to 2020 with losing 40 kids, 30 kids, 20 kids, week in and week out throughout the schools. And that brings about the quarantine situation. And again, the economic downfall that cascades through with people taking off work and not getting paid to miss work. This is the way to keep these kids not only safe and from Jackie's point, from becoming a vector to getting infected and taking the illness home. There's a lot of facets to this. So if we can keep them from taking the illness home to grandma and grandpa or a vulnerable relative, that's great. If we can keep the kids in school, that's goal number one in this setting.
May I ask, why are we not applying those same standards to our middle school and high school students?
Yeah. The reason for that, giving the high school age kids the laxity, is they have the ability to be vaccinated. Many of them are. And when the CDC first came out and said if you're vaccinated, you no longer have to mask indoors. Everyone celebrated. So that horse left the stable. You see from our own community, we're not masking out in the community. It's not mandated any longer. Even though the CDC has reversed direction and said people can be positive now and transmit illness even though you're vaccinated. That was the rationale behind the recommendation to go back to indoor masking. It's a valid point. I'll be totally transparent to say that there's a common landing ground here. And if school systems that have chosen a hard line of we're going to mask everybody no matter what versus we're not going to mask anybody no matter what, that has created this polar discussion left and right. If I'm a high school kid, I remember high school vaguely, but if my day starts out with I need to wear a mask when I leave my car to walk through the halls and sit my butt in a seat, and then I can take my mask off, and then at passing periods I put my mask back on, and then I go to the next classroom and sit down and take my mask off, 7 of my 8 hours a day are spent unmasked. I'm okay with that. I'm in school. If I'm vaccinated, I'm not getting quarantined if somebody else around me, turns up positive, if I'm asymptomatic. If I'm unvaccinated, if I choose, I don't want to get vaccinated, or my family says I don't want my child to be vaccinated, I can still wear a mask and avoid quarantine. The likelihood of that happening, or to being able to say, okay, well, we need you 12% in this classroom to, you can take your mask down. We're not going to expect to get honest participation in that regard. So the common ground is to separate these kids, forward face. The likelihood from a medical standpoint of people sitting around just like we are right now, distance from one another appropriately, just having a conversation, or sitting quietly at a desk with a normal heart rate, normal pulse rate, everything else going on, not over breathing, not standing up and intermingling, our chances of infectivity are logistically low. So, and same thing goes for teachers. If they're at the front of the classroom and they're standing 15 feet from their kids, they don't have to have a mask on. They could be at the front of the class and doing their instruction. But the idea is, we want to limit transmissibility, and the way to do that is through masking. But forcing you guys to make a decision, mask or no mask, brings the masses. And it brings the masses to say this is absolutely one or the other. And there are, people building gallows outside right now, I'm sure, for all of us anyway. You just can't look at it as A versus B. I said that earlier. I think it's a good common ground. It's being done in Europe and several countries. It's going very well. People that have said no masking, that are already back in school, are already closing schools. Took less than a week. So, and again, eyes on the prize always, keep kids in school. And this is the way, avoid the quarantine.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, something that Dr. B said and then what you said, I'm just trying to keep it straight in my head on quarantines. You talked about an unvaccinated high school student has the option to get the vaccine, to not be quarantined, or to wear a mask. Is that only, the mask part, is that only acceptable if the infected person also was wearing a mask? Because that's what Dr. B said, but I'm just trying to keep that straight in my head. If you're wearing a mask, is there no quarantine no matter what, or does the infected person had to have been wearing a mask as well?
It's a good point, and I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of gray in it. If you were wearing a mask, you just reduce your chances of becoming quarantined by 50%. If you were masked and a positive kid is sitting next to you, not wearing a mask, you are still subject to quarantine if you go by black and white. Now, if you go by looking at that case by case and figuring out some other issues, there's still going to be some debate there because of wearing your mask. It's going to be case by case. It has been case by case. When we first started this process, we looked at black and white 1,000% of the time. About 2 days into it, we figured out there's a million different shades of gray. We have to look at every single case, case by case. From an athletic standpoint, the higher institutions, athletes are they're choosing to get vaccinated to avoid it, so that they can keep playing. Everything is to prevent getting shut down, stop the quarantine. So we're giving high school kids have the option. If you're 12 and over, you have the option, quarantine or wear a mask. If the unusual circumstance goes that you got exposed to somebody and you had a mask on and they were positive and weren't masked, they would still be subject to quarantine.
It's whether they're asymptomatic too, which plays into it completely.
Absolutely, and that holds. That's a great point. You have to remain asymptomatic to not be quarantined.
But the surefire way is masking to avoid quarantine.
And vaccinating. Because even if you're vaccinated and you're exposed and you're asymptomatic, you don't quarantine. But if you become symptomatic, you go into quarantine until you test out of it or you expire your quarantine period.
Do you know who's enforcing reporting the masking or non-masking to decide on that?
Yes and no. We have ideas of where it's going to come from. We do our contact tracing. We speak to people. We speak to their contacts. Obviously, the teacher for the classroom is going to be able to offer some advice on that to say, I know for sure these folks had their masks on or they didn't. Is there a gray area there and a lot of laxity potentially built in? Yeah, absolutely.
And there are 3 levels of quarantine, correct? 7, 10, and 14 days?
Yeah, so we call that kind of testing out of quarantine, and it's getting a little hairier than that even. But basically, if you're exposed to someone and on day 5, you get a PCR test, which is a genetic amplification test, usually reported in 2 to 3 days, and it's negative, you can come out of quarantine on day 7 or day 8. There's also some rapid PCRs now that you get back in 2 hours. So on day 5, after your last exposure, you potentially test out of quarantine. If you choose not to test, then you're quarantined. If you're exposed to a positive and you are vaccinated or unvaccinated and you're symptomatic, you're 14 days from your exposure time. If you're positive, you're 10 days from your onset of symptoms or your test date.
Case by case has to be.
Yeah.
Is PCR testing, is that only through a healthcare provider?
Yes, right now, except Walgreens and CVS, they are offering some PCR without a doctor's order right now. But I don't know, I can't speak if there's a charge to it or a cost.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Brocken.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I think we need to take public comment.
We are going to take public comments now, and I have a whole list, and I have so many on our list that I would like to have a recommendation from the board, a motion from the board to change our time, our speaking time from our regular 5 minutes and change that to 3 minutes. Do I have a motion to do so?
I'll make a motion to change the time frame, that a public comment from 5 minutes to 3.
Thank you, Mrs. Wise.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lohr,
Aye.
Mrs. Lauer,
Aye.
Dr. Powers,
Aye.
Ms. Scott,
Aye.
Mrs. Wise,
Aye.
Mr. Irwin,
Aye.
Mrs. Killian.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion has been moved and seconded and approved, so we're moving the time of speaking with our audience from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. And I also would suggest that if someone speaks prior to the time you come up to speak and they are expressing what you feel exactly, that rather than repeating the whole paragraph or 3 minutes of it, if you would just be, if it would be acceptable to you to say, I agree that such and such or such and such, but make it a couple sentences, because it would just be time expedient, but we do want to hear exactly what your opinions are. So I'm going to start with Ricardo Hutchins.
Thank you for having me. I'll try to make this right to the point. My name is Ricardo Hutchins. I've been teaching for 22 years plus. Time flies when you're having fun. I'm blessed to inspire the creativity of young minds. I don't consider it a job, it's a blessing. You know, last year we lost a lot of educational time on remote. Students suddenly had to become as responsible and organized as online college students. I've got multiple college degrees, but I never could have done it online, and these kids can't either. We need to stay in person. We need to stay in person 5 days a week, and the best is masked. I totally love the, I teach middle school, so 6th grade, masked all the time. I love it. Problem is, 7 and 12, no masks. That's a power struggle. I teach middle school. That severs relationships with kids. If you're one of the people in the building who is doing what we're wanting to do here and enforce this plan, I become the bad guy. I was the bad guy last year with our administration when our administration wasn't wearing masks, okay? Everybody in the offices at our schools weren't wearing masks, many, many, many. It's a power struggle with adults. It's even worse with kids. We gotta stay safe, people. We've lost a lot of skills last year. You know, I gotta teach 7th graders this year, assuming that they have the skills from 6th grade, but they don't. And I'm gonna have to try to fill that in as every other teacher will. We got our work cut out for us, and we gotta stay in person. You know, work for the challenge as teachers. But, you know, mask is what's going to do it. We've just been saying multiple times that masks reduce quarantines. But yet we're saying, okay, situational masking, that creates situations. Especially when you're building, when it's divided between what group. Last year we had some high school teachers, you know, I teach at West Middle, we had a high school class down on our middle school wing. High school teacher, every kid in the class, no mask. Middle school kids, walk by. It's a setup. It's a setup for an argument with kids. They felt like they're being treated unfair. Why don't they get to? Why do we have to? That kind of thing. Kids love one word, and it's called fairness. 6, 7 to 12, they're going to call us on that. I know right now, well, I know what the CDC is recommending. And I know what our different states' governors are recommending different things. Well, that's inconsistent. Governors get voted in and out. The CDC remains consistently consistent. And that's consistently consistent is the key there. The CDC calls it. We've relied on them for years. We need to continue to do it. Too many people are getting medical degrees online. I'm sorry?
30 seconds left.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But, you know, please be the leaders we elected you to be and protect us, our students, and our community. I love doing what I'm doing, but there's a lot of anxiety going in, you know, when these kids can potentially have masks off and then come in a room where they're going to pass it potentially, you know. I just want to be in person. I love doing my job. And I just ask that you do everything you can in your care to put me in that position, every other educator, to keep us safe. It's inconvenient. I know that. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you all.
Thank you. Jacqueline Sabla.
Hello, everybody. I definitely won't need my 3 minutes, so don't worry there. I'm just a parent. I want my son to be able to go to school 5 days a week this year. I want him to go to school 5 days a week safely. He is 12 years old, and so I've been exposed, if you will, to a lot of 11, 12, 13-year-old kids over the last year. And I can say for certain, these kids don't care about masks. They don't. The first week, sure, it was mask, mask, mask. That's all they talked about, whether they're wearing it, they're not wearing it, they can't breathe, whatever. After that, I don't think I ever heard a single thing from my son or any of his friends about masks. It was just a thing that they did, and they didn't care anymore. What they did care about was the inconsistency in the remote learning. They cared about the quarantining. They cared about the fact that they didn't know from one teacher to the next how to turn in assignments. They didn't know from one day to the next if they were going to be going to school. That was where the fear and the anxiety and everything came in for these kids. It wasn't from the masks. They didn't care. They just wanted to go to school. They wanted to know when they were going to go to school, and they wanted everything to be consistent. And with quarantines, that's not ever going to happen. With inconsistent mask rules, that's never going to happen. And I would also like to say with the situational masking for the older kids, I think it's inevitable. It's going to lead to bullying. It just is. It's going to lead to so many more problems, and that's just my personal opinion. It's going to lead to so many more problems to allow certain kids to wear masks and certain kids not to wear masks. It's just inevitable with that age of children. So, thank you.
Thanks. Kevin Birchfield.
Hi, everyone. Oh, a little too close. Thank you for taking the time for hearing me speak. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert on infectious diseases by any means. I'm a father. My daughter is going to be 12 years old. She's in 5th grade. One of the things that I think I have not heard once tonight from any of the doctors or the administration is the mental health. My daughter has been going through extreme depression. You know, I'm very passionate. Again, I'm not an expert. I look at the numbers, I see how it affects me, I see how it affects my family, and one thing I can tell you is, after some of the very disheartening conversations I've had with my daughter, the mental breakdowns, the depression, it scares me. I've read some reports, including on CDC's website, about the increase of suicide attempts between specifically ages 12 to 17. I would just implore you to please consider what this plan entails on top of the other plan of kind of having assigned seatings. And I mean, my daughter told me she couldn't even sit with her friends, play with them at recess, on top of the mask stress as well. So I would just implore you to please consider the mental effects on our children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Brad Birchfield?
Hello, everybody. I'm not very good at public speaking, but I'm just going to try to get a couple things out within a few minutes that I have. Number one, I appreciate the Pledge of the Allegiance. I served in the military, spent a year in Iraq. The biggest thing on that is I didn't go over there to come back to have my freedoms taken away. I didn't have my kids' freedoms taken away. And what I mean by that, what I mean about that is, I believe in individual choice. I don't care if someone gets the vaccination, and I don't care if somebody wears the masks. It should be up to individual choice. I laugh when I hear the health department and Union Hospital come up here and speak. There's nurses and doctors at Union Hospital who won't come out publicly because they're afraid of losing their job, who have said they are told to admit people in the hospital for COVID because they get paid from the government. They will get paid for that individual in that bed. A lot of people are not even that sick that were in the hospital. Yes, there were some, and I do believe COVID is real. But a lot of those patients in there weren't that sick, but when you know you're getting kicked back from the government to get paid, they're told to admit those people in there. That's coming from nurses and doctors at Union Hospital. Health department, don't get me started about them. They were very big about wearing masks and social distance, but yet some of their employees go out, have a baby shower, take selfies with no masks on, and then they have to isolate and quarantine because they got COVID. Even though they're telling everybody else to wear masks and social distance, they're going out and partying and not following their own rules. They talk about after you get the vaccine, they recommend that everybody wear a mask and still social distance, but yet they go to baseball games with their newborn baby taking pictures with no masks on. But yet they're worried about everybody's kids, but they're not worried about their own. I find that kind of ironic. I do believe they have the best interest at heart. However, I think that they're just saying what they're told to say, and no one really believes in it. At what point do we not have the right to make our own decisions for our kids? And that was my brother before me, and I can attest his daughter has had a huge state of depression. Not just because of school, because it has caused family issues, because it's been politicized. No one wants to look at the facts, the statistics. You know, if we follow the Delta variant right now, if we look at all the other countries who's had their major spike in the Delta variant, they've already had a huge drop-off.
30 seconds, sir.
Thank you. In the transmissions of that. We had doctors and scientists who said if we follow that same timetable as other countries, mid to late September, we're probably going to fall off the Delta variant too. This is probably going to be another flu or cold that we're going to have to battle every day. But yet we don't mandate flu vaccines. We don't mandate masks during flu time. But yet we want to do this. It's not that deadly when if you go to the hospital and you go to CVS and you go to other places and you get tested, each time you get tested, that's a new case.
And that's time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Long?
Well, originally I wasn't going to talk so much about the COVID stuff, but apparently you guys are going to do the mask mandates, so I guess I'll bring that up too. But first off, I want to ask you, is school corporation's stance on CRT and social justice? Are you guys planning on teaching it or not? And is the Vigo County School Corporation planning on teaching the 1619 project? Because none of this I really agree with. It's kind of trying to indoctrinate our children, which I don't agree with. Now on to the vaccine. You what? All lives matter. Amen.
Just a moment, he's speaking.
As for vaccines, I mean, some of the stuff you guys got up here is like very counterintuitive. Like, well, what he was bringing up about the grades 7 to 12. I mean, by your logic, actually, they should probably be masked more than the younger children, because there's studies coming out showing that the vaccinated actually shed the virus and spread the virus more than those that aren't vaccinated.
So why wouldn't you want them to wear masks? Now, I'm not for masks, 100%. I worked through the thick of it last year. I only wore a mask because I was mandated by my job to do so, which is fine. They pay my bills. But when I'm not there, I don't wear it. I don't agree with it.
Okay, thank you. Mike Morris?
I think it's be said, I give my time to Julie Hendricks to speak.
Julie, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Mike. I did not ask for that, I swear. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak. There's been so much said, and I've had to take so much in, that what I originally had to say, to be honest with you, I've had some changes in thought process as we've gone along. As I'm sitting back here with some of my friends, I think we heard you loud and clear say our goal is to keep our kids in school, and our goal is to keep our parents at work. And I think that is an admirable goal for the school corporation. And while I am opposed to masking, I understand some of what Dr. Brucken said. I understand some of the ideas that you all put forth. And listening to what you all said about quarantining, I was not under that knowledge. So let me go, first of all, in saying that understanding now how the quarantine works in general is good. I knew that my son is a senior. He was unsure about getting the vaccine. And I will be quite honest with you, the only reason that my 18-year-old son chose to get a vaccine is because he does not want to be quarantined from football or basketball. I'm just going to lay it out there. He wasn't worried about his health. He wasn't worried about anything other than making sure he could stay in school and play the sports he wants to play his senior year. And his dad and I left that decision up to him in discussion with us, and that's what we chose to do. So my son is vaccinated. The CDC, in mentioning another gentleman, said something about the CDC. The CDC is political. Their views change based on politics. You know that, I know that, they know that, we all know that. But the CDC tells us that local public health officials, school administrators, should consider multiple factors when making decisions about implementing layered prevention strategies against this COVID-19. Schools typically serve their surrounding communities, and decisions should be based on school population, families, students served, and our communities. I know that Mike gave his time to me, so I want to point out that today Mike was one of the commissioners who put forth, from the commissioners of Vigo County, that very theory, that parents are in the best position to make medical decisions for their children. Rights should be strongly considered
30 seconds left.
as decisions are being made. I thought I had a total of 6 since somebody gave me theirs. Thank you. The decisions for their children and the parents' rights should be considered, as well as those being considered by our local school boards when making those decisions. Citizens can make intelligent choices about what's best for them and their families. We continue to do everything within our power to see the necessary services for testing and vaccines are made available. That just came from our county commissioners today, and that is in reference to exactly what's going on here tonight. I think we all hear the passion, we all hear the anger, we all hear the frustration. Our country is so divisive right now, it's heartbreaking. It breaks my heart to hear it, it breaks my heart to see it. I'm not going to get my time and Mike's time, is that what you're telling me?
No, each speaker is limited to 3 minutes, Julie. Thank you all for understanding that. It's going to be a fair issue with each speaker. Thank you, Julie.
Well, thank you very much. That's unfortunate that we don't get to speak longer about something that affects our children, but thank you.
Brent,
Give him back his time.
or Brent Hall, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you can speak, Mike.
Good evening. My name is Brent Hall. I live here in Terre Haute. I first want to say that I'm not anti-vaccine. Both my wife and I have chosen to be vaccinated, but I'm very anti-mask mandate for our children. We failed in Vigo County last year. Schools around here went back to school last August full-time. They did have some issues, but Clay Community, Southwest Sullivan, Noblesville, Avon, and many more went full-time at the beginning of our last year, and our junior high and high schoolers haven't been to school full-time since March of 2020. Most of these schools did take a 2 or 3 week pause in early November, but they didn't have any AB cohort chaos, etc. They did go back to school in early December. All these schools I just mentioned put out a release very similar to yours that you put out about 2 weeks ago, saying that masks would be recommended but not required. The majority of these schools are back in session right now. My child is going to be a second grader. He has not put on a face mask, put a mask over his face since the last day of school in May. There are a bunch of kids out there just like him. He's been running around all summer at the YMCA camp, ISU basketball camp, Terre Haute Rex camp, all without a mask. Have any of you board members and Dr. Hayworth actually looked into the back of a child's mask after he or she has been wearing it all day? Woo! It's wet and disgusting. My wife did a great job last year sending 3 masks a day to school with our son, but they are still gross at the end of the day. Not every child gets 3 masks a day and a parent at home to wash their mask. I will also tell you this, I did send a text message to my wife once I saw this plan, and this morning my son was all excited about school starting next Monday, and as of about an hour ago, he's at home crying because he's got to put a mask back on. Woo! Last thing, I read last week that a total of 1.5 million children did not enroll in public school last year, most of them being elementary students. It used to be that public schools were a place that our kids could learn to socialize as opposed to homeschooling. Now public schools are teaching a generation of kids to be afraid of their peers and become antisocial. Homeschool children will be much more normalized than terrorizing children based on irrational fear when all of our teachers, and me, and everybody in this room has had the opportunity to be vaccinated for COVID-19. We should never tolerate this nonsense here in Vigo County. I care about kids in this community. I enjoy coaching my son's baseball team. I enjoy coaching his basketball team. Kids need to see their friends laughing. Kids need to see their teachers smiling when they have success.
30 seconds.
The start of the school year should be a celebration, not an argument about more mask mandates. It's time to bring 100% normalcy to our children. And the last thing, I do have a question for Dr. Brucken is, I'd like to know what the off-ramp is, or for anybody here, what the off-ramp is for the elementary kids. Is it when the vaccine is available to them? What if that's 4 or 5 years from now? Are we going to continue to mask our kids for 4 or 5 years? It just makes absolutely no sense. Thank you.
Megan Carey.
Good evening. I am a parent of a 13-year-old in the school system. I also have 2 daughters that have gone through both the high schools, and I have 2 grandchildren that are going to be coming up through the school system. I am against the masks. My daughter had a very hard time, and she's here tonight. She's actually on the docket to speak, and she will come up and tell you what it did to her. I think that it is a parent's choice whether or not you want to have your child masked. And as far as the gentleman that talked about the mask, this is my daughter's mask from last year, and it is filthy. On the research that I've done, I haven't seen anything that tells you that masking is good for your children. Everything that I have seen has been viruses is worse for the older people. Masks are only effective for 20 minutes because of saturation. Masks actually don't stop everything that come in or out. I think that it should be definitely a parent's choice. My daughter, along with somebody else that said, had mental issues because of this last year. And after doing research, there were a lot of mental issues that went through hospitals because of masking. So I ask that you let our children and parents that are here to stand be able to make that decision for our kids.
Lakin Hadley.
public speaking very well, but I have sports-induced asthma, and masks make me not able to breathe, and the thought of having to wear one all day gives me anxiety and severe headaches. When I do get the chance to breathe, and I pull out my mask and I get in trouble by staff. It gives me anxiety and severe headaches to the point where I want to go home. And I have seen my school counselor on occasions to help me with my anxiety and to help me breathe. I have friends who also have anxiety from having to wear masks all day. I was quarantined and I never did get COVID. But I had to quarantine just because I was around someone who did get COVID and who tested positive. It should be a choice on masking. I know it's good for some, but it isn't good for all. Thank you for your time.
Megan Mollett. Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Mollett. Thank you for having us here and letting us have a moment to speak our minds on what we're looking for. I agree with what Julie Hendricks had to say. It was also really nice to be able to come in here and hear your side of your thought process on, why you're wanting to mask and reducing the quarantine and all of those types of things was really good and interesting to hear that. I'm not necessarily for the vaccine or against it. I'm not for masking or against it. I'm just here for freedom of choice. I think the parents should have a choice. And that's really all I have to say.
I'm not sure I can read this first name, but the last name is Lee on Ironwood Lane.
Thank you. Even if you could read it, you probably couldn't pronounce it. My name is Jewel Lee. I am at Ironwood Lane. Members of the board, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I fully intended on coming here to speak out against a full mask mandate because I thought that's what this board was going to be considering. I do not envy the position that you are in. This is a difficult decision. What I do commend you on is that you took something that is outside of the box. You went with a decision that is not necessarily A or B, as Dr. Brucken said. I commend Dr. Brucken on coming up with a different plan for you to consider. My issue with a full mask mandate was that you took out the rights of the parents to make the decision for their family. And like many have said before, that is a decision that I believe that they have to make for themselves. We have stressed upon our children, my wife and I have since the day they were born, make the right choices. But the right choices for one family are not the right choices for another family. Their family unit makes those decisions. What becomes troublesome is when you have a mandate that doesn't take any of that into consideration and makes a choice for everybody. In this situation, what you're faced with now, and why I do not envy the position that you are in, is that this plan allows the choice. For those who are able to choose the vaccine, you have withdrawn the mandate of wearing the mask all the time. It is only for those that do not have the choice right now, that it is not available to them, that you're asking that are going to require the mask to be there. Luckily, my children aren't in that age group, and I can't speak to them. But I did want to come up and say thank you for taking the time, the consideration, and moving away from just that A or B situation. And I'll leave you with one last point that I tell all my clients who are in municipalities. I will remind you that you all volunteered for this, and that these decisions aren't easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Elise Dillion.
I agree with most of what's been said tonight. I don't envy you guys for having to make this decision. However, I am appalled at the way our kids were treated last year. My kid was sent home 4 times, not because he was exposed, because he coughed in class. 4 times I took him to the doctor. 4 times I had to take him into a doctor's office where he had to be even more exposed because only certain places were screening for COVID. Unnecessarily exposed. He wore a mask. He didn't get mask breaks. He's in 2nd grade, 1st grade last year. He didn't get his breaks. He didn't get to take it down. When he had to be quarantined, he didn't get an option to have video on for his class. He had to miss school because he was sent home because he coughed. I am sad that the kids that you are sending home unnecessarily do not have the ability to still participate in class. If we're going to have these standards, there needs to be a plan in place. Why can they not use their Chromebooks, their phones, to still be linked into class and still get the education that they need? If this is the decision you guys are making. That's all.
Thank you. Trenton Cates.
As you know, as some of you may know, I'm a former student of the Vigo County School Corporation. After that, I went out and did construction work for the union. Then once the COVID came around, we had to start wearing masks. If you looked at the mask, though, the mask, dust would go right through it like nothing. The virus particle is technically smaller than that. It can actually transmit through an N95 mask. So the masks really have no effect. And if you look at previous years, in the year, let me look it up real quick and show you guys. In the year 2000, Y2K was going around. Did we do anything to prevent that? Then anthrax in 2001. West Nile in 2002, then SARS in 2003, which is a form of the flu, which technically COVID is a form of the flu. Studies have shown that we all have, every year, there's a different virus or something going on. And has that stopped the world from going on? No. I'm sure many parents out there feel they don't want all their kids masked if they don't want to. They want to be able to have a choice. How many of you parents want to have a choice to mask? And I'm sure many teachers out there want to be able to have the option to wear a mask or not if they want.
Trenton, you need to address the board, please. Thank you.
But we all have a freedom. We came to America and set up the Constitution for our freedom. If all we're doing is making people wear masks, that's taking away the freedom. So without freedom, we don't have a country anymore. People have fought for the flag and went to war and died.
30 seconds, sir.
They've died fighting for this country to provide us freedom, to live life normally how we want to. Please consider giving parents the option to vaccinate and or mask if they choose to.
Thank you. Casey Evans. Thought I saw Casey come forward. Is there Casey Evans?
He said go ahead.
Okay. Betsy Smith?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I too am not a public speaker, as most of these people have said. My name is Betsy Smith. I'm a current practicing nurse practitioner. A lot of my past practice has been in pediatrics. I agree, nobody likes masking. I came here today, I didn't know there was going to be revised recommendations to the board, but what I wanted to talk about was universal masking. I understand the public, or people in the public, wanting a choice. However, my concern with that is the data that I've seen for those that is masked, the actual contact with holding in the droplet precautions and things will not protect the individual that is masked from contracting or COVID-19. That will help to curb the spread from them spreading it to others around them. So I think that that portion of it is a concern to me. I do have 2 kids who are under 12 in the Vigo County school system as well. I didn't mention that. And I know that, you know, with the current Delta variant, as being the predominant strain, is a more infectious strain. And the American Academy of Pediatrics reported 2 weeks ago an 85% increase in pediatric cases under the age of 12. And that was prior to schools actually starting. Most of these kids were not in large enclosed spaces, they were outside. So with that kind of increase, that's concerning to me. I also have been listening to major medical institute who are over major pediatric medical institutions across the country that are seeing the sharpest rise in COVID-19, pediatric COVID-19 cases more than any other time in the pandemic. Any other time in the pandemic. That is due to the Delta variant. We had a tumultuous year, granted, absolutely. Although we are a lot more educated. We are a year past where we were last year moving into the school year. We are more educated about COVID-19. It's not RSV, it is not influenza A or B, it's different. It has the potential to overwhelm our hospital system again. I also wanted to say that if our kids contract it and bring it into schools and other kids contract it and bring it home, like I said, it has the potential to overwhelm the hospital system.
30 seconds.
I just wanted to say that you have been tasked with the safety of our children, and with that comes the safety of our community as a whole. And that's difficult because you probably came into this hoping to keep academia at the highest standards. And so I appreciate you listening to everyone's voices and for moving forward with safety as the #1 goal in academia as well. And I would like to keep our kids in school too. Thank you.
Neil Walbrock?
Thank you for the time, folks. I do appreciate the situation that you've been put in or put yourselves in, however you want to look at that. But I do thank you for it. I am anxious for a return to logic and reason. I think it's real simple. Last year I thought was ludicrous. Let's put a different kid in school every day. Why don't we just do Monday and Tuesday for one set, take a break, Thursday and Friday. Right? We got a little bit of time, let's break it up, maybe separate those challenges, maybe minimize that case count. But moving into this year, most of what I was considering is out the window, so I'll say it this way. I have no faith in the PCR test. It is not designed for this application. I think it's ridiculous that it's still in use. I think that once the CDC, I mean, I should go to the CDC. I think we need a proper test, and if we don't have a proper test, I think we should say, we don't have a proper test. It's real simple, okay? If you want to go with asymptomatic, hey, great, well, I've got symptoms, I've got a fever. That's what we've always used as parents to determine whether our child had a cold or not, whether our child had something that they would get better from or not, and then we'd go to our doctors or our healthcare professional, maybe our nurse, family, whatever. So I'm anxious to have the opinions of folks that do work in it every day, and I appreciate you guys coming. And I'm through with hearing about all these considerations that really shouldn't take into effect. I mean, what's a PCR test? 75% false positive. Okay, so why do we bother? Put it down. If we are going to listen to the CDC, I think we should consider who sponsors them. I think we should consider who sponsors the vaccine, as far as whether we should consider even taking those things and putting them into our child's arm.
Amen.
I'm done. Okay, so I thank you, and I do appreciate that we are in an impossible situation, and I do appreciate that we all want our children in school, because we do. Okay? But this isn't. I mean, this isn't the answer. But I appreciate the lack of AV options. I don't want to put the mask on kids, and I want to make sure that your enrollment stays up. I want to make sure that we leave our children in your schools, because I want my child socialized. I'm capable of teaching them. My wife's capable of teaching them. I have the opportunity to do so. And I think there are a lot of people that would choose to be broke and have kids that are taught properly and not taught the madness of believing tests that don't work and listening to government agencies that aren't even government agencies, but are presumed or presented as such, and then we should take that faith.
That's time. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Courtney Espinoza.
This is the first time I've ever been to a school board meeting, so it was very interesting, and I want to say thank you for letting me come. I really appreciate that the board members walked in your masks and the example that you're setting for our community. I do really appreciate that. I have two children. One of them is in the age group to be vaccinated, the other is not, and they are going to fall in these two different categories that you guys are presenting. Overall, I'm really happy with this program. I want to thank you for looking at science when you made these decisions. I do wish that we were going for universal masking, but I think that this has a science-based approach, and I appreciate that. I kept my son home for a year last year. He is a student who has an IEP, he gets speech therapy at school, and he needs to be in school. He went back in March, he got quarantined one time. It wasn't fun, but him being in school was wildly successful. And I want to thank you guys for making me feel comfortable enough to again send him back this year if we can approve the masks, at least for that K through 6 age group until they have access to the vaccine. I do appreciate the pillars of our country and freedom and everything that everyone is talking about, but I would ask board members and everyone else to consider, do we take that same stance when we're talking about drunk driving? Do we say, it's okay if you all drive drunk because that doesn't affect me? Well, it does affect me because you can kill me if you're driving drunk. And likewise, if you're not wearing a mask, you could kill my kid. So this isn't about your seatbelt, and if you don't wear your seatbelt, that only affects you. Drunk driving affects everyone. Not wearing masks affects everyone. So I would just hope that people could maybe hear it from that standpoint. And I know that the school has, looked at the data, the COVID dashboard, and I appreciate all of those resources being available to the public as well. Our positivity rate is crazy right now. It is nowhere near the under 5% that has been recommended from the get-go as a good marker where we can feel safe in public spaces. And we're nowhere near that 5% positivity in Vigo County right now. I have heard mental health concerns tonight. That's something that I also have concerns about.
30 seconds.
Okay. I feel really strongly that our children's best chance at having good mental health is to be able to be in school 5 days a week. And that is why I appreciate so much what you guys are doing, and I really hope that this proposal passes. I would love if universal masking were also to be considered, but thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Long. Rebecca Long.
10 children, 22 grandchildren, and 18 grades. I mention that because we've spent, the oldest is 64. Spent a lot of years protecting kids. And this breaks my heart, as I'm sure it does yours. One thing that I want to ask that no one's brought up yet, and I direct this to Dr. Holder and Dr. Ruffin. Why is it, since the survival rate of COVID is so low, do we not get ivermectin and zinc and a Z-Pack? People can't, there are so many doctors that have come forth and they've treated, one doctor has treated 1,000 patients under his care through his hospital by using remdesivir, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, hydroxychloroquine, along with large doses of vitamin C and zinc and these other, and 2 or 3 days later, they're out of the hospital, they're fine. If we would do that, we wouldn't be in this situation, because it wouldn't be. You don't get any doctors that I'm familiar with in Terre Haute, and I go to Northside Family Medicine. Don't hear any of that. Why are we not, maybe we are boosting our kids with vitamin C and things like that. There are so many, okay, I'm with the people that think the CDC is corrupt. I'm with the Indiana Health Department. They are saying what people are telling them to say, excuse me. You can go on YouTube, and you think that's funny, but you can go on YouTube to the Thrive Time show, just type that in.
30 seconds, ma'am.
Thank you. And there will be doctor after doctor after doctor who has studied this. Sherry Tenpenny gives facts about how we can cure this, okay, how we can treat this without having so many people suffer. North Carolina Congressman, I'll close with this, Madison Cawthorn.
And that's time. Thank you.
Said this is child abuse psychologically.
Candace Minster.
Good evening. First, I would like to thank you for giving all of us a chance to speak tonight. I know this is a really full room, so thank you for that. I also commend you on the work that you've done. You've clearly put a lot of thought and effort and care into this recommendation that you've made this evening, so thank you so much for that. I'm amending what I would plan to say. I'm not going to talk about the data because you know it. Clearly, you have all the information that you need to do your job, and that is to keep our schools and our kids safe so that they can learn and grow and thrive. So you know that one of the best tools that we have right now to protect unvaccinated individuals are masks. So you employed so many of these tools last year, and thankfully school spread was very low. And I want to thank you for that as well. So I had come tonight to ask for, to enforce universal mandatory masking in our schools. I know it's not the most popular option, and you're hearing some very loud voices in opposition to masking, but it is the most sound decision to make to protect the health, the safety of our kids, our teachers, and staff, and to ensure an uninterrupted school year. We are all tired of this pandemic, but our fatigue is not going to make it go away. I want to leave you with something that I learned yesterday, which really struck me. I watched Face the Nation, and Arkansas's Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson signed a bill into law preventing mask mandates and other COVID protective measures in his state. And he came out and declared that he made a mistake in signing that bill. He stated he was wrong to ban mask mandates and that, quote, facts change and leaders have to adjust to the new facts that you have and the reality of what you have to deal with, end quote. Citing the sharp rise in COVID cases in Arkansas schools, with nearly 900 teachers and students quarantined in just one district, he explained he had to go against a very vocal minority opposing the use of masks. He finished by saying, quote, we have to have leaders who will resist the loudest voice in the room and talk common sense, compassion, and logic to them, end quote. I ask that you stand up and be those leaders today, and I thank you for doing so.
Christina Edwards.
So, thank you for allowing us to come and speak. I am not a public speaker by no means, so I just want to start off by, and I will try not to get emotional here, but last year was rough on everybody. Parents, our kids, teachers. My husband and I made the choice last year to keep our son remote learning. In that school year, we tried everything. Mind you, we both work, so it is very hard for a parent that works full-time and try to be a teacher as well. I'm not a teacher. Our son struggled with remote learning. We did everything in our power to try and talk to the school about getting him back to school. But now you know, Mrs. Edwards, the masking is still in effect. Yes, I understand that. My son has skin issues, so I feel that him wearing a mask all day would make that issue worse. I just don't feel that, and you know, there's been research, I don't know, from a doctor that I researched up, and based on his extensive review and analysis, there is no question that he feels that healthy people should not be wearing surgical or cloth masks, nor should we be recommending universal masking. I feel that it's a parent's choice for their child. We pay you to teach our kids and to provide a good community for them to go to school. But and just today, I had a family member ask me, is your son going back to school Monday? Because our son really wants to know if he's coming. He wants to know that his friends can be there and be around other people. It has been emotionally, mentally sad for our kids to not be able to get the education that they need. And I'm not saying that, you know, that we don't have to put in place certain things, because I understand you guys have to follow your procedures too. But I feel as a parent, our kids do not have a voice in any of these decisions that are being made. So yes, it does affect them mentally, emotionally, and all around. I ask that you please revise the plan, because I was here last month, and I was happy to see that masks were going to be recommended. So please, you know, look at that again. I just, and my son actually wants to come back to school, but based on now, you know, he's probably not going to like the idea that you guys have probably changed everything. Hopefully you'll reconsider. And I just feel that, you know, if there's an option that parents have, if you're afraid of getting sued by other, you know, parents and this and that, come up with a different plan that says we will not be accountable or what have you. Our kids need an education. We've never masked in all the years of all the viruses out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Isbell is the last name.
I'm going to pass, but I agree it's the parent's decision.
Okay, thank you. Christina Mackey, I think. Christina? Christine?
Hi, I agree with most of those saying parent choice. I just wanted to point out, it seems like a lot of this is about quarantine and just some things I noticed. The vaccinated can still get it and spread it, and how does not quarantining them work? That doesn't seem like science to me. Same way with the masks, I sent an email with a lot of data that supports that these masks do not work to stop viruses. To me, it just seems like a lot of theater, and honestly, it feels coercive to vaccinate and mask, and not based on who masks and I guess that's just, I'm just asking for choice. I totally respect anyone's right to vaccinate or mask or do whatever they feel they need to do. I'm just asking for the same choice. Thank you.
Steve Ellis?
Much like everyone else, we appreciate and feel for the position that you are all put in, and I don't envy you in the least. I hadn't planned on speaking this evening, but I put my name on the list just in case. One thing that I would like to know is when you guys did your study prior to coming up with the plan, what percentage of students came back as having depression? Does anybody know that answer?
It's not a.
Okay. Oh, it's not. Okay. So. No, that's all right. All right. So I would have had the same question about migraines, and actually they're both rhetorical questions. The truth is, my guess is those studies haven't been done. My child, and that's apparently the young lady back here, one of my children has had migraines as well, and so masking, and it was directly related to the mask. So masking is not going to be an option for us now. If he is one of the few, I wouldn't expect you to change what you're doing based on my child. But if the studies show that there are a lot of people that are having side effects, a lot of kids that are having side effects, I would hope that that would be taken into consideration. I apologize, I didn't plan on speaking, so I just took some notes. I'm a local business owner, and one of my observations back when COVID was kind of heavy, we never did require a mask. But I noticed some people wore masks when they came in. And one of the things that I've noticed when they did that was, I started paying attention, they would constantly adjust their mask and touch it. And then they would ask to touch something in our retail store. And then they would hand it back to us, and then we would have to touch that same item. Now, since I've been here, I've been watching each and every one of you that are wearing masks this evening. Almost every one of you have touched multiple times, touched your mask where you're breathing. And then you touch, whether it's a pen or a bottle, door handles, toilet flushers, whatever it is. You're going and you're touching all this other stuff after you've been touching this soiled mask all day. So I would hope that we would take that into consideration. I understand that COVID doesn't spread as easily from touch, but it's still something to take into consideration. Next is, how are you going to know if a person's vaccinated? Are you going to take their word, or are we going to make people start showing papers?
If a violation.
So, my next question, that's true. Much like someone else said, how did we get through this whole summer with our kids being out amongst all these other kids? Okay, well, I'm going to ask real quick, by show of hands, quickly and quietly, how many of you are pro-mask? All right, quickly and quietly, how many of you would like pro-choice? All right, at the end of the day, what I'm going to remind you is that you are not our leaders, you are our representatives. Your majority is standing behind me. Your majority is standing behind me, and they have spoken.
Jennifer Walbrock?
I'll try not to shake too
Me too.
I agree with most of these people, it seems like, now that I'm hearing. I grew up here all my life. Became a nurse, I worked as a nurse, and then I became a stay-at-home mom. It was a tough time last year with the computers and the computer work and the FaceTime and the internet not working. I get all that. I do want my kids in school, but I don't believe the masks work. Even in the definition of a virus, it talks about how small the virus is. Okay, as opposed to the surgical mask, which only stops large particle droplets. Okay, those don't even work for viruses. I've had enough time to do research at home. Okay, nursing never stops. You know nursing never stops. It's a continual learning process. The same goes for the science. And there are a lot, thousands actually, of doctors and researchers, people on the front lines, nurses on the front lines, who are saying, this is not what it seems to be. Our emergency rooms are not full. People are getting over this. Okay, last count, what was it? Kids have 99.995% survival rate of COVID-19. Now, if this is true of the masks and how the virus can get through the masks, right? Then last year, we're gonna have just as many, if not less, viruses this year with kids not wearing masks at all than wearing masks. Because the mask didn't work last year. Let's see, what else do I have here? The PCR test was already brought up. Yeah. False positives. They can set those. They can set them to whatever verity they want. Come up with whatever result they want. There was a doctor. Hang on here a second.
30 seconds.
Baruch Ben Schulboim. He's a published, cited author, has a PhD, pulmonary rehab, cardiology division, the Rabin Medical Center in Israel also. He says these masks don't work. Actually, they can be detrimental to people. Let's see, hypoxia, not being able to breathe, contamination, rebreathing bacteria.
Thank you. Ashley Bryan.
Thank you again just for how much work you guys have put in. This has been a very difficult school year for the parents, for the educators, for everyone, and in just a variety of ways. And there's not an easy solution to this. And I know a lot of us feel very strongly one way or the other, but no matter what is chosen, it has effects. And that can be difficult. I just wanted to share, just from our personal family perspective. So I have 2 kids, both elementary schools. My youngest, Isabel, was diagnosed with leukemia at age 2. So we did 2.5 years of treatment, and I'm glad to say she is in remission, so she is cancer-free at the moment. Then half a year later, she developed a rare condition called PFAPA that kept her out of school for over a third of the year last year, being very sick with that. Thankfully, she's in remission with that as well. My older daughter has type 1 diabetes. So as you can see, we spent a lot of time in hospitals. We've spent a lot of times and a lot of doctor visits. And so my children represent the vulnerable. And so I want to advocate for those who are vulnerable, and I want to advocate for mask wearing. And I know that it's not perfect. I understand that it doesn't just magically stop the virus entirely, but it's something. It's something that we can do to help protect the vulnerable. It's something that we can do to hopefully avoid all the quarantining that we had last year. I've been told to just simply keep my kids home. Like, oh, you've got sick kids, you should just keep them home. And we tried that last year. We did that for the first half of the year with my younger daughter, and it was difficult. For her, the chemotherapy affected her brain development. Okay, so being in a traditional classroom setting with support services really is the best educational option for her. My older daughter is in the Gifted and Talented program, and again, it's best for her also to be in person. And I think almost every parent here would agree that we want to be in person. And so I appreciate that this plan really promotes being in person and trying to find a way to reduce the quarantining as much as possible. Now, one of the other considerations I've heard is let the parents choose. And one of the difficulties I feel for that is that I'm choosing right now to mask my kids as they go to summer school. But when I picked them up and when I was in the school, they were the only ones with masks. So they're obviously upset that they're the only ones wearing masks. But additionally, they're not as protected, right? They're protected a little bit because they're wearing masks. They would be much more protected if everyone were wearing masks. And especially in an elementary school setting where they're not able to be vaccinated, I appreciate those who choose to wear masks around my children so that we don't have to spend more time at the doctor and we don't have to spend more time in hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Fairbanks.
Hello. I'm going to start off by telling you about a scary part of my summer. My family took a trip out of state, and when we got back, one member of my family was exhibiting some symptoms. So even though that person was fully vaccinated, we went to get a COVID test. The COVID test came back negative, so we assumed it was allergies, and we proceeded on the rest of our summer plans, which was to take another summer trip to visit some elderly relatives in a different state entirely. As we proceeded along that way to the other state, the rest of us in the family fell ill too, so it wasn't allergies. So we got a bunch more COVID tests, and they all came back negative. So it wasn't allergies, it wasn't COVID, it was just a cold. But by the time we got to our relative's house, some older people, we gave that cold to one of them. And I felt really bad for that because it was so absolutely clear that I had delivered that cold in my suitcase. And that the thought still makes me shaky inside when I think that it might have been something worse, that could have had worse consequences. Because it took that person longer to recover. That person was more vulnerable. And it reminded me not only how respiratory viruses can spread in a closed car, but also that kids and students and schools are not separated from our community. We're not just talking about the safety of children, we're talking about the safety of children and also their family members and the community. And what I understand about our community is that over the course of the last month, our rate of hospitalizations for COVID have increased by over 400%. So, and that's not, I mean, you can't multiple times go to the hospital. That's hospitalizations have increased. So last year, my child attended the virtual school. Now vaccinated, we were looking forward to resuming in-person education. When the new variant emerged, we were hoping that our school corporation would pay attention to new developments and develop new plans that protect our children and that protect the continuity of education. Several speakers have mentioned parents' choice, but parents who choose to have their kids unmasked are making a choice for my child and other people in the community too. My job as a historian, and I'm surprised that it's relevant to bring that up in this context tonight, but I just wanted to leave you with General George Washington approved what was in essence a vaccine mandate for the army that fought for American independence because he couldn't risk not having continuity among his troops. The preamble of our Constitution says we formed this government to promote the general welfare. Please do.
Mike Hardy.
My comments are on something that's not on the agenda, so why comment now or later in the meeting?
Later in the meeting.
I would suggest later in the meeting. Good.
Jenny Norris.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak my opinion. I took some notes on my phone because I wasn't sure if I was going to be speaking or not, and I kind of tried to take in as much as I can of what everybody has been saying. So I'm approaching my opinion as a parent of 2 children and as a mental health professional that works in our community. My children are 7 and 11, and I worked with children between the ages of 3 and 18 last year. And what I saw overwhelmingly was fear, uncertainty, and anxiety from my children and these children, just because they weren't sure of when they were going to be going back to school. Are we wearing masks? When am I going to be able to see my friends? When can I see my teacher? And I really had to work with my own children and those to help them cope with that. And I learned that they were willing to do just about anything so they could get back to their normal. And that included wearing masks. One of my children has a learning disability. And a lot of the children that I work with have learning disabilities or IEPs, and so learning virtually or from home was really difficult for them. So I think making the best choice possible for kids to attend 5 days a week, which it seems the majority of people support, is really important. Regarding the comments for parents' choice, I just wanted to state that I want to consider that masks help reduce the particles that you're breathing in and out, and they protect your germs from leaving your body and going into other people's. So if other people are not making the choice to mask their children, my children are being exposed. And I want to know how we are going to protect my children in this situation. Like another lady had just said, my children will be wearing masks at school, and if they're the only ones, it's not going to be that effective for mine, who also deserve to be going to school in a safe environment 5 days a week. And so I support the revised Plan C that Dr. Brecken talked about. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Akita Babishi. Akita Babishi? Yeah.
Good evening. My husband and I are the parents of 2 elementary age students, Sonia and Rena, and they can't wait to go back to school. We are excited for the new school year too, as they will greatly benefit from in-person learning from their amazing teachers at Dixie B. However, we also have a concern. Masking is essential for all students under the age of 12 and all students in general. Furthermore, the CDC recommends universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to schools, regardless of vaccination status. I have come here to ask you to look at the science and statistics. Pediatricians from the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as experts in public health and epidemiology, have consistently come to the conclusion that masks are necessary based on research and data. Additionally, cases in Vigo County, percent positivity, and hospitalizations have increased significantly compared to a month ago. As much as we would all like for COVID to be a thing of the past, the Delta variant is surging here. And when the mask recommendation was voted on a month ago, COVID spread was low, but that's not the case now, as both adult and pediatric cases are rising everywhere. The vast majority of cases in Indiana are unvaccinated individuals, 96.8%. Both of my children are currently under the age of 12. Therefore, they do not have the option to get vaccinated. They do not yet have a choice in protecting, we do not have a choice in protecting them against COVID. Therefore, I'm asking you to continue to use the mitigation strategies that the schools used last year. Strategies that included universal masking that we know worked and helped keep our children in school where they belong and where they can thrive. It would be more detrimental to children to get sick themselves or see a loved one get sick, or even if they were healthy, to miss school due to quarantine, and that's been talked about extensively tonight. Masking is the best chance at our students staying in person consistently. Let's put politics aside and prioritize the health, safety, and well-being of all students and faculty. While you may have voted one way a month ago, it does not prevent you from reassessing the situation and voting differently now. You should vote in favor of safe practices to keep our children healthy and in school as consistently as possible. The circumstances have changed, And it is my hope that your vote does as well. I appreciate your time and your energy that you put forth with this plan. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Carla Spear.
Hello. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I know it's been a very long night, so I will try to keep my comments short. I come here as a parent of 2 children under 12 who do not have the option to be vaccinated. And so, while I would love to see universal masking, I do appreciate the plan that has been currently proposed. And just one thought that I have that I would like to emphasize that several people here have shared tonight is that COVID is a community problem and it requires a community solution. So our air that we breathe is a common shared resource, and it takes everyone to do their part in order to protect our children so that we can go back to school 5 days a week. Thank you.
Thank you. That was our last speaker regarding this issue, and now Mike Harding, you have another comment.
Sounds so long, I can't hardly walk up here. Freezing in there too.
Oh, gosh. I was a school administrator, central office person, assistant superintendent of instruction, in a really, I think, a dynamic school corporation in southwest Indiana. And we had problems like this. And Dr. Hayworth, I really am proud of you for allowing everybody to say their piece. And sometimes it's kind of tough when you hear a little chuckle behind your back, which I've heard before in my case. But that goes for the whole board. You're champions for children. You allow people to say how they feel about their kids. And my thing I want to talk about tonight is basically about Ray Park. And if we're talking about our health, you know, Vigo County has some of the worst health in the state. And our state is 41st in the country. If we're going to grow, we have to grow our health. And it's not just battling COVID, but it's battling too much drinking, too much alcohol, too much fast food and obesity, these types of things. Too much inactivity. 30% of our county is inactive. So we have about 45 acres at Ray Park that we've developed a plan. And Earl Elliott, who's the president of the city council, and I would like to sit down with you and maybe a board member and make sure that you guys as a board know what that plan is for the 45 acres that are available. We talked to the county commissioners the other day. They were very thoughtful with their comments. And the other thing I want to talk about would be the First Tee program has been off to a real success. You know, I'm a golfer, have been a golfer forever, do a lot of walking. You know, this last winter, even though I'm close to 70 years old, you know, I can walk 6K in 40-degree weather and shoot near par still. So I think everybody needs to be active. And so anyway, I appreciate the cooperation that Dr. Fenton and the leadership she's done in First Tee. We have a fundraiser on September 30th at Otter Creek. We'd like for some people to play and maybe even a sponsorship from the Vigo County School Corporation. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our speakers for this evening. I appreciate your listening to everyone else and their opinion, and I appreciate your being here. Many of you said I'm not a public speaker. Well, but you are a community member with views, and you need to feel comfortable coming here and sharing your views. So I do appreciate that. Did we? Now it's time for information from Superintendent Hayward.
Well, I think at this point there was a recommendation in front of the group, so I think we either decide to table that recommendation, modify that recommendation, take that recommendation, but I don't think we can just let that sit there.
No. Is there a motion? Any of the above?
That would be my preference, to make a motion to table
for the time being and take all these things into consideration.
I'd like to make a comment. You know, a month ago, we were in a whole different place than where we are now. And right now, we see an increase in hospitalizations and an increase in cases. What if we moved through and took a vote on it and then promised the community that every 2 weeks, we'll come back to the table? And as Mr. Hall said, you know, like, what's the off-ramp? Well, the off-ramp is where we were a month ago, and that's where I think we need to be. But if we looked at our metrics that we utilized to make that decision a month ago, that we're using tonight, if we do that every 2 weeks until we're out of the woods. I want us to be where we were a month ago.
Right now, there is a motion on the floor. Is there a second? I would say that that motion dies with no second. Is there another motion to be made?
I make a motion to accept Plan C.
Is there a second?
I'll second that. But to be clear, the recommendation put forward.
Does that include the revisit of every 2 weeks, or is that a modification?
I would like to make the motion to accept Plan B, which is the recommended plan, with this board every meeting we have from here on out, looking at the metrics that we've utilized to make our decisions, that we make that promise to the community that every 2 weeks we'll look at the record, at what we are stating as policy for our students and staff.
Do you go along with that
Yes.
second, Dr. Powers? Okay, the recommendation is that we accept the proposal as presented now, but with every 2 weeks looking at reviewing that. There's a motion by Mrs. Wise and a second by Dr. Powers. Dr. Goldberg, roll call.
Mrs. Lohr?
No.
Mrs. Lauer?
Aye.
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
No.
Ms. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
No.
Mrs. Killian? I would like to state that I am more for universal masking because my students are high school students. I'm very conflicted in this vote, but I feel protecting those that cannot be vaccinated is very important, so I vote aye. So we have 4 ayes and 3 noes.
The vote is 4 to 3, and the motion passes.
Can we ask a question? Are we allowed to ask you a question as I'm committed?
Well, the board meeting's over, Steve, but you can come forward and ask us individually. That would be fine.
If the people in this room and others simply choose to send their kids to school without a mask, what's the
Right now, is there any other information from any other board members? Be shared.
Can we just say if people have questions, how to get those answered? As a public comment, if there are follow-up questions?